Today's video blog posting is Creating a Culture of Community, Part 2. I'm going to provide you with a brief executive summary of Part 1 for those of you that haven't viewed that. Essentially, the whole idea for the post is a follow-up from a posting at our WordPress site back on May 5th of 2008 that we called the 5 Purposes tool. And it provided an overview of 5 basic generic purposes that are true for any organization. Well, the second of the 5 purposes then described was as follows: to create a viable, sustainable community rather than merely a workplace. So I think we can all agree that's an important organizational purpose. But it really begs the question of how do you create this type of community in your workplace? And I've really been remiss in following up and providing supplemental materials on that subject. So as I researched the subject, I tried not to be confined by the normal research materials that we use for business. And I actually looked to try to find the best community building resources anywhere and then see if I could apply them to business. Well, I came up with 2 sources who are notable experts on the subject of community building, but who are outside of the normal business literature. One was the teachings of the Buddha, which we covered in the previous video blog, Part 1, and today we're going to cover materials from Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life book. And if you know anything about Rick, you know that he's a pastor of a very large church out in California, and so he certainly knows a thing or two about community building. And his advice or principles are as follows. Number 1, he reminds us that the greatest gift you can give someone is your time. Now, we think about that in the context of our spouse and our children, but we don't always think about it in the context of our workplaces. And it creates a series of follow-up questions. So if the greatest gift you can give somebody is your time, how much time do you spend with your direct reports? Of that time, how much of that time is really giving them real focused attention, being fully engaged in those interactions, not allowing ourselves to be being distracted by voicemails and emails that need to be returned or other pressing meetings that we're thinking about. So how much time are we spending directly with our direct reports, and what is the quality of the time that we're spending with them? You can look at this another way and ask the question, how much time do you spend on people issues in general? HR can be a bit of a red-headed stepchild in an organization. I know Jack Welch was a big believer in that in his role as CEO of GE, that he needed to spend about 50% of his time on human resource issues. Not necessarily 50% of his time directly with his direct reports, but between that and other overall HR-related issues, he needed to be spending about 50% of his time as CEO on people issues. The second point that Rick makes is that real community requires authenticity. So I'm a big believer in authenticity. We had a blog posting at WordPress earlier in the year that we called Be Unsanitary. And the purpose of the post was to remind us that if we sanitize our workplaces to the place where it's just plain vanilla ice cream, that we're really not going to be creating a community. Communities are authentic. We need to be authentic organizationally and individually. Real fellowship happens when people get honest about who they are and what is happening in their lives. Be real, be honest, be authentic. That's what creates community. In a real community, people experience mutuality. Mutuality is the art of giving and receiving. It's about depending on each other. It's about interdependence. It's about building reciprocal relationships, shared responsibilities, helping each other, making commitments, honoring those commitments, mutuality. Real community is about empathy. People need to experience empathy in your workplace if you want to build real community. Every time you understand and affirm someone's feeling, you are building fellowship, empathy. In a real community, you experience mercy. Fellowship is where mistakes are rubbed out rather than rubbed in. Fellowship is about resolution as opposed to retaliation. So real communities experience mercy. Mistakes are rubbed out instead of rubbed in. Real communities require commitment. They take honesty. You're going to have conflict in your work community. You're going to have conflict in any community, and that's okay. When conflict is handled correctly, we grow closer to each other. It takes candor and honesty, and those are other consistent Welch principles, success principles. Real community requires commitment. Commitment requires honesty, candor, dealing with conflict, not trying to gloss over it. Real community requires humility. We talked about humility when we covered the Jim Collins materials. Level 5 leadership characteristics, the humility of Lincoln. And Rick reminds us that humility is not thinking less of ourselves, but thinking of ourselves less. Real community requires courtesy. Courtesy is respecting differences, being considerate of other people's feelings, and being patient with those that irritate us. It's okay that people irritate us. These people have been sent to irritate us on purpose. If we were all the same, we wouldn't produce optimal solutions. We need to be challenged. We need different viewpoints. We need people that irritate us. Pearls are created by sand creating an irritation within the oyster that ultimately leads to the creation of the pearl. Real community requires courtesy. Real community requires confidentiality. Gossip always causes hurt and divisions. It destroys fellowship. The fellowship of a business is more important than any one individual within the organization. So no matter how much of a revenue producer somebody may be or how much burden they carry on their shoulders, if they are a well poisoner, then, and if you have been candid and communicated the challenges with them, and they have refused to modify their behaviors, then you need to politely and professionally ask them to move on. Real community requires confidentiality. Real community requires frequency. You must have frequent contact with your group in order to build genuine fellowship. You can't have one-off type communications, annual type communications. Relationship building takes time. There's no shortcuts, there's no silver bullet to building a culture of community within your organization. You need to be using some of this Covey Quadrant 2 planning time that we spoke about when we covered the Buddha's materials in the last post to plan the frequency of your communications with your people and proactively schedule those and make sure that you follow up and follow through. My hope is that these timeless tips from these great thinkers and experts on the subject of community building will help you with your goal of accomplishing the second organizational purpose of creating a viable, sustainable community rather than merely a workplace. But in addition to the materials that we've provided, we are interested in feedback from you. We would like you to share with us your community building best practices. We would love to hear from you. Thank you.